Greetings on a full afternoon from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We're very glad that you could join us for our latest installment of Virtual Voices of the Game. This is one of our regular conversations with Hall of Fame President Josh Rawitch. We'll be talking about a number of Hall of Fame related topics and themes over the course of the program. Josh has been with the Hall of Fame now since 2021. That is when he became the Hall of Fame's president. And as George Costanza might have said on an episode of Seinfeld, he is now fully ensconced at the Hall of Fame. Josh, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I saw a lot of Costanza during the World Series. He was making the rounds again in the commercials. So I appreciate a good Seinfeld reference. Thank you.
Yes. Hard to believe 3 full years that you've been here now. It really only seems like maybe a year and a half. The time goes by quickly. How do you feel now after you've had a chance to settle in? You've certainly become a vested member of the community. You've become a key part of the staff here in Cooperstown. How could you have foreseen these first 3 years going?
Oh man, it's been amazing, and it's honestly thanks to people like you and the rest of the staff that have welcomed me, not just into the offices here, but in the community, and our family loves it here. It is exactly what we thought it was going to be. There's just so much to love about Cooperstown and about the Hall of Fame, and I feel like there are times where it feels like it's way less than 2.5 years, and then there's times when it feels like we've been here for a decade. And so I don't know. I'm just enjoying the ride and very, very thankful for this opportunity.
During today's conversation, Josh, we want to touch upon a number of different Hall of Fame topics. Let's begin with the recently concluded World Series between the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Texas Rangers, now the world champions of baseball for the first time in their 51 or 52-year history. You, of course, used to work for the Diamondbacks years ago before joining the Hall of Fame staff. Let's talk a little bit about what the role of the Hall of Fame president is at the World Series. I know that you annually would attend the series. Do you go to all the games? Do you select some of the games? Tell us how your schedule is determined for the Fall Classic.
Yeah, so we have a presence. The Hall of Fame has a presence throughout the whole series. John Shestakofsky, our VP of Communications and Content, tends to go to all the games, however long the series lasts. And I think my role has often gone whenever there was an opportunity for a clinch. So usually game 4 and beyond. I think that's what I've done my first couple of years. This year, of course, as you mentioned, was a little different because the team that I worked for a decade was hosting game 3, 4, and 5. So I went out a game early. I had actually intended to try to go to the games in Dallas, but travel woes managed to get me rerouted straight to Arizona for game 3, 4, 5, and had every intention to go back to Texas had it gotten there. But Rangers wrapped it up quickly, and so I did the middle 3 games, or I guess the final 3 games, I should say.
Josh, was it a little bit surreal for you going back to Arizona, not working for the team anymore, and here the franchise, they're on the highest stage they could possibly be? What was that like?
Yeah, that's the perfect word. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was very surreal. The atmosphere was really unlike anything I had seen at Chase Field in my decade there, but that makes sense. Obviously, it's as high stakes as you can get, but it was really cool to see so many people that I'm very good friends with who've worked there, in some cases for the entirety of the franchise. It's only been around for 26 years. So there's a number of people that have been there the entire time. Other people that either I hired or that I worked alongside that I was just really, really happy to see them all enjoying this run, and happy for the leadership team and the baseball ops crew that I'm close with, the manager, the GM, the president, the owner. So it was really neat, but ultimately in my role, I can't be rooting for one team over another. We're really trying to stay as neutral as we can. And I've got tons of friends at the Rangers, and ended up being very, very happy for all of them when they won it all.
For those of us who have never been to a World Series, and actually I've never been, I've been to playoff games, I've been to championship series games. I've never actually attended a World Series game. Tell us about the atmosphere. Is it palpably different from any other kind of game? What's it like?
Yeah, I guess to me, the biggest difference I feel like is that people get there very early. And so there's a vibe around the ballpark, no matter where you are, where everybody, part of it is traffic, part of it is I want to be able to say I was there for the whole process. So it starts very early, a couple few hours before the game. Everybody is in their seat by the time the ceremonial first pitch is going on. And so when you're walking on the concourse during the game, there's not lines of people getting, I mean, everybody tries to get their food early. And then really it kind of depends on what ballpark you're in. I mean, there are some ballparks where fans will literally stand for 9 innings. And we certainly have seen that and experienced it. I got a chance to go to Game 7 in Philadelphia of the NLCS and saw just an absolutely electric atmosphere there. I went with Jason Shelock. Some people here may know Jason from our development department. It's probably one of the greatest atmospheres I've ever seen at a game, but a World Series in particular, I think stands out because everybody is hanging on every pitch. Every pitch just matters so much, and that's so different than a 162 game season.
You've obviously been to both of these ballparks, the ballpark in Texas, also Chase Field in Phoenix. The ballpark in Texas is relatively new. I mean, really just a few years now. Looks beautiful on television. Tell us what it's like to be there in person.
Well, interestingly, the only time I've been there, oddly enough, was I think the fourth day it was open. I was there during the COVID year when I was working for the Diamondbacks. So I think the Rockies opened up the ballpark and the Diamondbacks were the second team to go. So the only time I've been there actually is with no fans, ironically, given what we were just talking about. I've only seen it when it is literally completely empty with pumped-in crowd noise. But what I'll say is they just did an unbelievable job creating an experience in the ballpark that as I got a chance to walk around the whole place and see it, kind of imagine what it would be like in its first 4 days of existence. And it's really incredibly well done. There's like most of the new ballparks, I think they've all tried to figure out how to have a little bit of something for everybody. So if you're the sort of fan that wants to be right up close, there's opportunities there. If you like standing room only and more of a party atmosphere down the line, they've got that. There's great suites. There's other decks where you can go. There's all sorts of things for, I think, every kind of fan. And I think that's what baseball is trying to do, is make sure we're not catering as a sport. We're not catering to any one particular fan, that we're actually looking out for everybody.
Let's talk about Chase Field. What are the 2 or 3 features of that ballpark that really stand out in your mind?
Well, certainly having the roof is, I think, unique for if you come from a city where you're so used to outdoor baseball, and that's what people are looking forward to, winter ending, and I get to go out and sit in the stands. It's quite different when you've got the roof closed. And I think having the roof open in October, it was actually pretty funny. Torey Lovello used to regularly refer to postseason baseball as long sleeve baseball. And all my years in Arizona, he used to say, we're trying to get ready for long sleeve baseball. And then, of course, he's playing in the World Series and it's 82 degrees and absolutely perfect outside. He really didn't need the sleeves, but the roof is definitely a feature. I think it's incredibly unique. The thing that the ballpark is really well known for, I'd say, is the pool. I mean, it's just so rare to have this pool out in right center field that ultimately I know one of the home runs landed in during the postseason. And it can hold about 30 to 40 fans in a really cool, that is, a lot of houses in Arizona have pools in their backyard. So it was a very Arizona feature to put in there. And I think that's really neat. And then I'd say the other thing that I think they've done really well over the years there, from a ballpark standpoint, is try to create unique foods, really cool foods. The one that stands out to me is the churro dog, is this unbelievable dessert they created. But they have done a very good job of adding different types of restaurants and really making the fan experience great for those who come to the games.
You know, Josh, in watching some dome stadiums on television, sometimes they can come across as very antiseptic, very sterile. I never get that impression, though, from Chase Field.
No, that's a great statement, I'm sure, for those who built it and those who have been working on it. I mean, it does have a very different feel. I wouldn't say stale, but there's no doubt it feels very different when the roof is closed for much of the summer there than when they can open it in April and September and October. It's frankly, I don't think anybody would argue it's a much better vibe when the roof is open, but clearly you can't do that when it's 100. I think they had like 30 straight days of 110-degree weather this year. So anytime somebody complains about winter in Cooperstown, I remind them that summer in Phoenix wasn't exactly the easiest thing to live through either.
As usual, the Hall of Fame came back with a trove of artifacts. Here are just a couple of them, and we're going to talk about some of these items that you were able to bring back. But I want to talk first about the Hall of Fame's process in acquiring artifacts at the World Series. It's a little bit different than what happens during the regular season. At what point do you and our Vice President, John Shestakofsky, begin to approach teams about acquiring artifacts? Do you lay groundwork at the beginning of the World Series, or do you wait until a few games have gone by?
Well, it's a little bit of all of that. It's a great question. So early in the postseason, pretty much whenever a team clinches, I'll reach out to the club president and owner and just congratulate them and wish them well, and generally let them know that I hope to see them at the end of the month, because that's obviously everybody's goal if you're in the postseason, is to have the Hall of Fame in your clubhouse when it's all said and done, because you know what that signifies. But then as it gets a little closer, once we're down to two teams, Shesta will reach out to the two teams, our primary contacts there, and let them know kind of what we're going to be looking for if your team wins, what we might be looking for if your team doesn't win, in terms of kind of the volume of things. We might want 5 to 7 things. We don't specifically ask for artifacts. We will sometimes, if there was a very large LCS, like an MVP of the LCS who we know we're going to want something from, we may mention at the beginning of the series, but really we don't do a lot of groundwork laying other than a FYI, this is the sort of stuff we think about. And then Shesta and I will spend the whole series talking to a number of the curators on staff here and others involved in the process about what do we think might be good storylines to help tell the story of the series. And the list changes constantly. I mean, it's funny, as somebody hits a big home run to maybe get close to winning a game in game 3, but then if the visiting team or the home team ties it up, it becomes less relevant of an artifact. We may not. So it's a constantly changing process. And I'd say usually throughout the final game, when we're getting ready to clinch, we will try to lock down. These are the 5 or 6 things we're going to go ask for. Who's going to ask which guy, and then go through that process once we get downstairs.
Josh, you mentioned the initial contact with, a team president, high-ranking official. After that, do you then approach people in the public relations department? At what point do you talk to players themselves?
Yeah, it's a little bit different for every team. That's the unique thing, is because with Authentics, I'm sure many people watching this know that there's now the whole MLB Authentics program. So at some teams, it's the PR department. At some teams, it might be a club president who's more involved. At some places, it might be the Authentics department and clubhouse attendants get involved quite a bit, because they're the ones physically taking the shoes or the jersey or whatever off from the guy. So it's actually a number of people that we're in touch with. And really, I mean, you asked earlier what we're doing at the Hall of Fame, but a lot of it is artifact collection, and a lot of it is building relationships where the entire sport is pretty much in one place. So whether it's media members, clubbies, executives, network, people from MLB Network, or from just various parts of the game, you're constantly having these conversations, and a lot of different people play a role in getting this stuff back to Cooperstown.
You mentioned a few moments ago that a lot of times you don't specifically ask for a very particular artifact. You want something from the player or the manager, but you kind of leave it up to them to choose whether it's going to be a cap or a jersey, shoes. Is that kind of how it works?
It depends on what it is. So certainly what we want is something that tells the story. So if a guy stole a base, we're probably not going to ask for his bat. But if he was a pitcher, if we ask for a jersey and he says, could I give you my cap or my spikes? Generally speaking, we respect that this is big moments for them, and they might have told their mom or their dad or their kids that they were going to give them the jersey from their game. And so we're very respectful in the process. It's not like we're going down there and telling them we want this, and this. It's a conversation. And we try to help them understand that when they donate this, it's going to be here, not just on display for the next year in Autumn Glory, but for the rest of time. I mean, I remember saying to Marcus Semien, your kids are going to be able to come to Cooperstown and ask about great-great-grandpa Marcus's jersey, and we're going to pull it out for him and show it to him. And that happens all the time here, where descendants of people who have donated stuff. So it's a very collaborative process. I wouldn't say we just say like, hey, can you give us anything? We try to make suggestions to them, but if they say, I'd really rather give this, of course, we want to be open to what they want to do as well.
For those who haven't seen the complete list of the artifacts that you and John were able to bring back, some really interesting stuff. A World Series luggage tag used by Will Smith. We don't normally ask for luggage tags, but this is appropriate because he became the first player in history to win 3 straight World Series while playing for 3 different teams. So there's a travel aspect there. Bat used by Adolis Garcia in Game 1 when he hit a game-winning home run. You mentioned Marcus Semien, jersey and elbow guard that he used in Game 5. Batting gloves worn by Evan Carter, who set a record with 9 doubles during the postseason. A glove worn by reliever Josh Sborz, who recorded a save in the final game. Also a batting helmet worn by the World Series MVP Corey Seager. And then we have the two items that are featured on the screen here. We have the cap worn by the manager, Bruce Bochy. 6 managers have won at least 4 World Series titles. Bochy is one of them, but he's the only one to do this with multiple teams, which is pretty amazing. And then on the right side of the screen, we have the spikes and the cap worn by the winner of Game 5, Nathan Eovaldi, who has become really a terrific clutch postseason pitcher. Josh, let's talk about the Bochy cap, and the kind of amusing thing that a lot of people know about is that he has a rather large hat size. I've seen everything from 8.25 to 8.5. At one time, I know he had the largest hat size of anybody in the major leagues. Going back to when Hideki Matsui played, Matsui, I think, had the largest hat size. Kind of an amusing part of this story. So I guess the Bochy cap becomes the largest cap in the Hall of Fame collection, right?
Well, it's interesting. Shesta actually asked when we brought it back if it was, and in fact, one of our curators mentioned that we got his cap from a previous World Series that was the same 8 1/8. So it is tied, we believe, for the largest. We aren't 1,000% certain, but we're pretty sure it's tied for the largest. And it was funny. He had a great line, Bochy, I saw after the fact. And once we publicize what's coming back, obviously all the media does stories on these various things. And Boch said something like, "Yeah, I guess they always ask you for my hat. It must be because of the size of my head." And it certainly wasn't necessarily our thinking, but when you're trying to split up, you don't want to get 6 guys giving hats and no spikes or gloves, that sort of thing. So you try to space it out a little bit. And with Boch, as soon as he handed it to me, the very first thing I did, I wanted to see what the size was. It was 8 1/8.
8 1/8. That's interesting. One of the great things, I guess, about getting a cap from a manager, manager is not involved in playing on the field, not diving and sliding. So the cap is pretty clean. It looks like, based on this picture, it's pretty much in pristine condition.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And your point about them not being on the field, they're obviously not going in and out every inning where they're changing from a lot of managers don't even wear uniforms anymore. They'll just put a pullover on and they'll just have a t-shirt under it. So there's really you're not going to ask a manager for his spikes that he didn't really do anything other than walk back and forth to the mound for pitching changes. There's really only a couple of things you can tend to ask a manager for. But I'll tell you, last year with Dusty Baker, you mentioned the luggage tag. We always do try to find something that's a little bit unique for each World Series. And in this case, they also went 11-0 on the road. The Rangers did, which made the luggage tag even more meaningful. But with Dusty, we asked him for his toothpicks because he was known to be always chewing on toothpicks. He has these really cool wristbands that are part of a company called Mims Bands that had Dusty's face on it. So most managers aren't wearing wristbands that you can ask. So we're always trying to kind of look for unique stories that help tell the story of the World Series. And Boch winning his 4th and ultimately, I think several people, as we walked him over from one side of the field to the MLB Network post game, somebody said to me, "You ought to just induct him right now on stage on the internet on MLB Network Live." And I said, it's not really how our process works, but he obviously has a pretty amazing case when he decides to hang it up.
It's a fascinating story. I mean, here's somebody that many had presumed was really retired after he left the Giants as manager a few years ago. He comes back. He's 68, which, as managers go, is not that old, but, the trend we've seen in more recent years, managers in their 40s and their 50s. And here's a guy, he comes back seemingly out of retirement. And in his first year back, not only leads the Rangers to the postseason, but to their first franchise world championship. It's one of those storybook stories that if it didn't happen in real life, you'd say, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, no doubt. And if you look at the last few managers, Dusty came back. It wasn't in his first year, but in his late 70s, got them there. You have somebody like Rob Thompson from the Phillies or Brian Snitker, who won the previous year. These were all veteran managers, and there's no one way to win. I think if that's one thing we've seen, there is no perfect equation that if you get this person, it's all going to work out great. You see plenty of teams, obviously the Diamondbacks being one of them, that surprised everybody. Nobody thought they were going to even get to the playoffs, let alone win throughout and get to the World Series. And And then you have others that take the Padres, spent a ton of money. Everybody assumed they would have a great year, and as it turned out, it wasn't the year. So it's been an interesting offseason with a kind of managerial merry-go-round, and certain things come in vogue at times and then go back out. And our job here is to tell the story of all of it and preserve it so that people can always come back and study it and enjoy it.
Another interesting story, Josh, is Nathan Eovaldi and his spikes representing his achievements, winning Game 5. Here's a guy that I don't want to say he was a journeyman pitcher because I think that degrades him. He's been a better pitcher than that, but he's well-traveled. He's been with a number of teams over the course of his career. He's bounced around a little bit. He's had some injury problems. And here he is, relatively new with the Rangers. And someone who just seems to pitch his best in the postseason. He's been a good regular season pitcher, but at times he's been at a Hall of Fame level in the postseason. I mean, it's a remarkable story as well.
Absolutely. And what's funny, when I first got to the postseason this year, I got to Chase Field on the workout day, and I went into the visitors clubhouse, and the first person I saw, because his locker was literally right when you walk in, he was the first locker on the right, was Nathan Eovaldi. And I suddenly had a flashback to his big league debut when I was at the Dodgers. He was a rookie, and he made his debut against the Diamondbacks in that clubhouse. And I kind of just had this crazy flashback, and I immediately went up to him and said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember." He goes, "Oh, no, I remember you." I said, "Wasn't your big league debut like right here?" He said, "Yeah." And I could remember like it was yesterday. And it was interesting. It allowed us to kind of reconnect on a way that then when you go and talk to guys at the end of a series, you have a little bit of a relationship. And in this case, Shesta, I think, was the one who went over and talked to him as I was talking to a different player. And he said when he won the World Series with the Red Sox, he wanted to give his hat and his spikes to the Hall of Fame. And so when we had asked him just for his spikes, he said, "Can I give my hat too?" And we said, "Sure, why?" And he said, "Well, that's what I did in 2018 when I was with the Sox." So it's, again, I think these guys, certainly someone like him who's now seen how this works in the postseason, he's been asked for things before because he's been very, very good, as you noted. There's a level of understanding that when they're putting something in Cooperstown, it's going to be here and preserved in a way that it's not going to happen if you stick it in your garage when you go back home at the end of the series. And I think that's a really cool thing that these guys know who we are when we're walking around the clubhouse, and they're hoping that we're going to come up and ask them for something because that means that they had a pretty good series and that they did something right.
Another interesting thing is how spikes, shoes for baseball players have really drastically changed in the last 30 years. Baseball caps, really not that much different. There is a World Series logo now. That's been going on for a number of years. But you look at the baseball spike today, and even if you look at spikes from the 80s and 90s, I mean, they generally were black shoes, black laces. They didn't have these bright colors like we see today.
Mm-hmm.
They've changed drastically just in our recent lifetime as fans.
Yeah, and I think in two different ways. One, I mean, of course, you're talking about professional athletes, and so the needs of performance have, I mean, obviously millions and millions and millions of dollars are spent trying to figure out how to maximize performance of people's movement on their feet. So the actual shoe itself is clearly going to change dramatically. But then also, as you noted, it was probably about 10 years ago that MLB kind of loosened up, maybe a little less than that, loosened up some of the restrictions where it used to be very clear you can only have two colors and it has to be the primary color of your team, etc. And really in the last few years, they've essentially said, look, part of what we're trying to do is expand the game into a younger audience that loves looking at cool shoes. And so it's funny, I walked up to Zach Gallen's locker on the same day that I was just mentioning Nathan Eovaldi, and Gallen had an entire shoe rack literally next to his locker of 20 pairs of shoes probably. And I said, "Hey, I don't remember you having this when I was here a couple of years ago." He said, "No, it's starting to overflow out of my locker. I needed to actually create a rack for this." And so, I mean, you have different color combinations of your uniform, and I think the fashion of baseball is cool, and certainly guys who want to put messages on their shoes. Marcus Semien actually put a 510, which was his home area code in Oakland, was on his shoe, and that's also why we took the elbow guard you mentioned. It kind of harkens back to the area where he grew up. And so guys pay tribute in a lot of different ways to the things that matter to them, their kids' names or other things like that they didn't used to allow on the shoes, and now they do. And oddly enough, Nathan's are relatively simple that we're looking at here.
Yeah. We focused a lot on the Rangers artifacts. Of course, they won the World Championship, but let's not forget about the Diamondbacks. You and John were able to acquire some artifacts from Arizona as well.
Yeah, really two things we got from them that are really cool. One, Ketel Marte, who wound up basically breaking the record for the longest hitting streak by any player in the postseason. He hit in 20 straight postseason games going back to 2017. We have the bat that he used for the game that he got his 20th consecutive game. He didn't wind up getting a hit in the last game, and so we got the bat from the previous game, which is fantastic. And then we also took home, again, just trying to mix it up, the headset used by Greg Schulte, the Diamondbacks' longtime broadcaster. This was his final game. He was planning on retiring at the end of the year, and he had done 26 years. He's the only broadcaster on radio that the Diamondbacks have ever had as a full-time guy like that, and he got to finish it out by calling a World Series. So I actually was fortunate enough to wander into the booth, hear him sign off for the final time, and then he handed over his headset that will be preserved here in Cooperstown. So again, you're trying to find storylines from both teams, and in this case, the Diamondbacks only won one game and didn't get a chance to do a whole lot of damage on the field, and this was a really cool story we could tell off the field from a longtime broadcaster.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the story of Schulte. A lot of times local broadcasters, unless we're in that geographic region, we just don't become familiar with their work. For those who haven't heard Greg Schulte on the radio, what's his broadcasting style? What's a typical broadcast like for him?
Obviously, like any radio guy, he's very good at describing what's happening because you don't have the scene in front of you. He's trying to paint you a picture, and he grew up in the Midwest, and so he's got kind of a down home sort of Midwest feel to him, but certainly has great home run calls that people in Arizona know. Warning track wall, touch 'em all, and his call of Gonzo's walk-off hit in 2001 against the Yankees is probably the most famous call in Arizona sports history. So again, like you mentioned, if you grow up in these areas, these are the soundtrack of your summer. This is who you know. And I think every city has one or two people that fall into that category that have been there for so long that generations of people, if you were an 8-year-old watching that team win it all in 2001, you're now in your 20s. And this guy's, you might have kids that are listening to him call games too. So pretty cool.
So the 2023 World Series in the books, we might have liked it to go a bit further than 5 games, but there were some memorable moments. Classic Game 1, just a fantastic game there. And certainly memorable as the Rangers win their first World Championship in franchise history. Want to reflect now on Hall of Famer that we lost earlier in the fall, September 26th of this year. Brooks Robinson passed away. Without question, one of the most beloved members of our Cooperstown shrine. You started here in 2021. I don't know if you knew Brooks from before, but over these last 3 years, how well did you get to know Brooks Robinson?
Unfortunately, not as well as many of you who have been here for all the years where he's been coming back. He was a member of our board of directors, so I was on a lot of board calls with him, but he never actually got to any of the meetings in person, and always incredibly kind and friendly. And I know of so many people at the hall, when you ask them, their memories are of him as a person, not as a player. Just an incredible human being, and we were fortunate enough to go to his memorial service at Camden Yards, and that's what everybody talked about, was just what this guy was, a Hall of Fame person who just happened to also be that good of a baseball player. But I wish I'd have gotten to know him. I am grateful that we had a phone call maybe a few months before he had passed, and we chatted for a little bit, a couple minutes or whatever, however long, and then we hung up. And probably a second later, he called back, and I thought he might have pocket dialed me, so I just let it go to voicemail. And he left a voicemail that said, I realized I never actually called to congratulate you. And so I just wanted to call you back and say an official congratulations on the job. And so I'm fortunate that I now have that in my voicemail because I didn't pick it up that day. It just shows you what kind of person he was, that he hung up the phone and he was thinking about that in that way, which just probably tells you all you need to know about him as a man.
It sounds exactly like something that Brooks Robinson would have done. And people ask me about him, and a lot of times I'll get a question like, who's your favorite Hall of Famer, or who's the Hall of Famer that you really like on a personal level? And Brooks was, always right at the top of the list when people ask me that question. But I would try to explain to people, when you met with Brooks, talked to him, he treated you like you were the Hall of Famer. And he sort of acted like he was the employee. and he wanted to know how he could help out. That's kind of the feeling I always got with him.
That's awesome. Well, it doesn't surprise me. And another quick one I'll share that I thought really just sums him up is he's got a longtime person who's worked with him for years and years. Diane, who was ultimately the one who let us know that he had passed, but she had said that Brooks had talked about coming back for this induction. It was going to be his first one in a while, and he was planning on coming back until about 2 weeks out of this past year in 23, and he ultimately couldn't make it. And he had promised a friend of his that she could come with, and that she would get the royal treatment. That if you're hanging out with Brooks, you're going to get treated to all the spoils of being around the Hall of Famer, I guess. And he basically said to Diane, I may not be around for the one next year in 2024, but can we make sure that this woman gets the same treatment she would have gotten if she came with me? And I just thought, man, he wasn't in rough shape at that point. So I guess he maybe had the foresight, or he knew. But ultimately, the fact that he was thinking a year ahead of somebody else and making sure that they would have an incredible chance to do what they would do if he was still around, again, sums him up in kind of a perfect way.
You mentioned, Josh, that you went to the memorial service at Camden Yards. Tell us a little bit more about that. How many people showed up? It must have been just thousands and thousands.
Yeah, it was pretty unique because it was right after the season ended on a Sunday, and it was the very next day on a Monday morning. And so I think probably in some ways it was really intended as less of a family funeral and more of a public memorial, a chance for people to come and pay their final respects to a guy who really, I mean, what everybody talked about, this guy meant so much to the city of Baltimore. He was Mr. Baltimore. He was Mr. Oriole. He fit in that town in a way that I think just resonated with the people of Baltimore. And so you had everybody from Cal Ripken and Jim Palmer to maybe lesser known from a Hall of Fame standpoint, but Doug DeSenses is there speaking on his behalf, and club broadcasters and front office staff. It was a really pretty cool thing to hear everybody talk about. What Eddie Murray was there, of course. What a wonderful, and several current players of the Orioles showed up. Probably 5 to 10 guys from the Orioles ended their season on a Sunday afternoon, and Monday morning they didn't have to come down and be a part of it, but they knew what he meant to the franchise. So it was pretty special and helped me learn a lot about him because, like I said, unfortunately I didn't get to meet him before I took on this job, and so it was a powerful thing for us to be involved in.
I was growing up with baseball in the 70s. Brooks was really nearing the end of his career. But every once in a while, I like to go to the YouTube channel and look at the highlights of what he did in the 1970 World Series. And no matter how many times I see it, it still gives you chills when you see this one-man defensive wrecking crew dismantling the Big Red Machine.
Yeah. I mean, and I read when he passed, I did a good amount of research just to understand a little more about his playing days and whatnot. And he had a quote that said, ball players spend a whole lifetime wishing to have a weak period like that any time in their life. And for that to happen during the World Series is just so unlikely. You have to have the balls hit where they were. You have to be on your best. You have to do what you did offensively. It really is. It's pretty nuts that when you have that big of a moment in your life to come through, pretty cool, pretty special for him and for the city of Baltimore.
Hall of Famer Brooks Robinson certainly lived a long and full life from 1937 to 2023. Still the standard bearer among third basemen, in my opinion, defensively, and one of the great people the game has seen as well. Talking about the Hall of Fame and perhaps some future Hall of Famers, Josh, we have coming up December 3rd at the winter meetings in Nashville. The Hall of Fame will be conducting its era committee vote. This is for managers, executives, and umpires. And you can see the 8 candidates that are on the list. 4 managers, Cito Gaston, Davey Johnson, Jim Leyland, Lou Piniella. 2 executives, Bill White and the late Hank Peters. And then the 2 umpires, Ed Montague and Joe West. So you're not directly involved in the voting process, but you're going to be there in Nashville. And I believe you're in the room when they deliberate, correct?
I am. That's one of the cooler parts of this job is kind of we do help put together what the committee is going to look like because we want to try to make sure that the committee doesn't have any conflicts of interest or appearances of conflict of interest. You obviously want it to be a very open vote, a conversation where anybody can kind of share their thoughts. And so we do help put together the committee. And then ultimately, yes, I get to sit in there when each name comes up and it gets talked about. and 16 people weigh in with their thoughts, and then each of them gets a chance to pick up to three of these 8 that they believe they can have. They can vote for 0, 1, 2, or 3. But I have to say, doing this now, I think for 3 different committees is just a surreal experience to hear that conversation happening.
Without getting into specifics, past meetings that you've gone to, does it get pretty heated in there? Do people get pretty emotional making arguments for people they feel really believe should be in the Hall of Fame?
I wouldn't say heated. I think emotional. You use that word. I think there's no doubt there are people who feel strongly they've done the research on someone, or they saw them play, or they've in a lot of cases talked to a lot of people before they get into that room to understand it. So there's no doubt there's passion and energy, and people have strong opinions. But one of the things we ask them to do when they come into the room is come in with an open mind and be open to hearing somebody else's perspective, pro or con. You may walk into the room thinking I'm going to vote for somebody, but if someone convinces you that they might not be up to the standards, we want you to be willing to change your thinking, and vice versa. If you didn't think they were, but you came in and you left there. So it's there's no doubt it's a very respectful room when you're talking about the level of people who are voting. These are some of the most respected Hall of Famers, executives, historians that our sport has. So they're gonna still speak in a respectful way. Nobody's gonna make it challenging, and ultimately, I think what's most important is it's fair. It really does. I mean, I've only been there for several of them now, but there's no vote trading. Go, you vote for my guy, I vote for your guy. It's just a very open conversation, and then everybody gets a chance to say who they think belongs in there. It's all in a private ballot, so nobody knows how anybody else votes. And then ultimately, if you get 12 of the 16, that 75%, you hear your name later that night called out.
Josh, if any of the committee members have a procedural question, do they come to you with that during the meeting?
Yeah, so Jane Forbes Clark serves as the non-voting chair each time. And so her, myself, and Shesta are the only people in the room that aren't voting. And we are there specifically for that point, either a procedural question, or if someone wants us to look up a statistic that maybe wasn't readily available in the packet of information that they have, or that somebody there's all sorts of questions that come up in there. And ultimately, that's what we're there to do, is try to help and just to make sure that the process does go smoothly. And I think it's an incredibly impressive process with impressive people, and it should be. It's the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and we take this obviously very seriously.
How long does typically this meeting take place? Does it take several hours, 2, 3 hours? How long does it go?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's throughout the whole morning. It could be, I guess it depends on each one, but I'd say 3, sometimes longer hours. You want to really, there's no limit to it. What you want is however long there's conversation to be had. We don't stop anybody. We don't say, okay, enough talking about so-and-so. You let them, you want everybody in the room to be heard, and you want people to have a chance to weigh in and then vote. So whenever that process ends, it's definitely multiple hours for sure.
And then you'll make the announcement that evening.
Yeah, so we let the actual candidate know. Jane will call each candidate, or not, excuse me, only the ones who are elected, not every candidate. Jane calls anybody who's elected to let them know just shortly before they go on air, because obviously it's important to us that it doesn't get out, and we don't. A lot of times they have a room full of people at their house, and we don't want this spreading before we go on MLB Network. But then that evening we announce it live on TV, and then the group of 16 goes to dinner and celebrates hopefully a well-run process.
So all of this happens on the first day of the meetings, Sunday, December 3rd, but there are other things that the Hall of Fame is involved with later on, right?
Yeah, so any living inductee, and in this case, the only one of these potential inductees who is not alive is Hank Peters. If any of the other 7 are elected, we will bring them into Nashville on Monday morning, and we will do a news conference with them on site at the winter meetings. Again, for anybody that hasn't been to the winter meetings, you have just picture a ginormous ballroom with media members, hundreds of media members in rows that are all set up facing a news conference setup. And so there's probably 10 news conferences that go on over the course of that week. Some might be about rules changes, some might be a big trade or a free agent signing, and ultimately we have a time period where we know we're going to come in, we're going to introduce any new electee, we're going to put their Hall of Fame jersey on them and their cap, and let the media talk to them for the first time in person. And that's been our process. It's pretty cool.
Let's talk about another important process that has been going on for a while now and will continue through next year. That is the ongoing Black Baseball Initiative. If people want to learn more about it, they can go to our website, baseballhall.org/BBI. Let's get an update on the initiative. There are a lot of moving parts to this, including the new exhibit. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But what are some of the other parts to the initiative that maybe folks don't know as much about? Where do we stand in those areas? I know there's articles, there's website features, other things going on too.
Sure. Well, I think from our standpoint, it was important that this not just be an exhibit only. And so to your point, there's a number of different elements to it. Certainly, we are going to create a separate website, an online website that's going to be focused on a kind of educational younger group of students that can tap into this. We've been bringing in students all summer. 1,000+ students have come in. I know your group's been involved in this from Utica and Syracuse, and really what that's just the beginning of it. I mean, we're going to continue doing that, but what we really wanted to make sure of is if we were going to, as I believe we will, tell an incredible story about the history of Black baseball, we wanted to make sure it wasn't just reaching the people that come to Cooperstown, that we're going out into various communities and both bringing people in from around New York State. Eventually, we're going to try to figure out, after we open the exhibit, how do we get out into other communities, not just virtually, but hopefully in person, and bring elements of this into various communities around the country. We just recently signed a partnership with a company called Roundtable Entertainment for some television content that we're going to be doing that's not just tied to this, but certainly this will play a part in it. We've got a book deal for a book that'll come out after the exhibit. So there's really, I mean, there's quite a bit going on, and we're honestly, that I think a lot of the curators have said to me, this is probably bigger than anything we've undertaken as an institution before. It's not just an exhibit like, say, our baseball card shoebox treasures or a Babe Ruth exhibit. It really is an institution-wide initiative, and I don't think there's a person in the building here who hasn't been working on it for the last 2 years.
As part of that, we have a new exhibit coming spring 2024, The Souls of the Game, Voices of Black Baseball. Some folks may not be aware, but our existing exhibit on Black baseball history, which was called Ideals and Injustices, A Chronicle of Black Baseball, that has recently been taken down. So that is not in place anymore. What is the timeline from here then, Josh, in terms of the new exhibit?
So we're actually getting very close. I'd say within the next, let's call it 3 weeks, be making an announcement on the actual opening. But it's going to open in spring, as your slide says. And we've got an amazing plan for when this opens, how to make it an entire weekend-long event that the people on this chat here are going to want to be a part of, an opportunity to come to Cooperstown and see this up close, because really over the next 3 to 4 months that we will start the process. We've now been, like I said, working on research and whatnot for multiple years, but now we start getting a lot of the artifacts in-house. If they're not ours, if they're loans, they're coming in. Got some incredibly cool stuff coming in over the next probably month to 6 weeks. And then you have the actual build out of the exhibit itself, which takes quite a bit of time. As you can imagine, we do things with great care here. And we keep referring to the area where that's going to be as kind of the heartbeat exhibit, the Souls of the Game. But the arteries are equally as important in our mind. We are going to have a lot of areas around the museum that will also be updated in other exhibits that help tell the story of Black baseball. So it's not just one single exhibit that we're opening. It really is a institution-wide effort. And I'd say if you pay close attention to the Hall of Fame social channels here in the next 3-4 weeks, you're going to start seeing some announcements and be able to make your plans to come see it in 24.
You mentioned some of the arteries branching out into other areas of the museum. In terms of the existing space now, which is on the second floor, so you're obviously going to be using that space for the new exhibit, but will that space also be expanded too a little bit?
Expanded, no, but I think we're going to use it in a different way that I think it will definitely look different. To those who have been here regularly and know how Ideals and Injustice looks, this will definitely look quite different. I think it's important to note that we're not just updating the old exhibit. We've completely taken it down and starting from scratch. So certainly there'll be a lot more interactivity and video content and other things of that nature that when we opened this exhibit 26 years ago, it really wasn't part of the way museums operated. And that was part of the impetus for doing this. Is obviously we want to make it engaging. We have 25 more years of baseball history since we opened the last exhibit, and our understanding of race relations in baseball and the stories that need to be told, our understanding of statistics in the Negro Leagues, and the things that Black people went through to be involved in the game over the last 150 years. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. We're going to be telling a lot of those stories, and I think it's going to be pretty spectacular.
So that space on the second floor, it's going to be reconfigured. It's going to look a lot different.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And anybody who's been here will know that it doesn't look anything like it currently does.
I know you're limited in terms of specifics about the opening in the spring, but will there be Hall of Famers, other dignitaries in attendance?
Yeah, very much so. I would imagine I could certainly say we will have multiple Hall of Famers and significant people from all around the game of baseball that will be coming to be a part of this, because I think is what I'm most proud of, certainly as our staff has worked very hard on engaging people across the game of baseball. And so I think there's a vested interest from a lot of people in wanting to see how this turns out. And that's I think a lot of them have been marking their calendar for the upcoming event and are going to definitely be here. And again, I don't want to be not trying to play too coy, but we're pretty excited about what we're announcing, and I don't want to trumpet here on this call. I don't want to take the credit. We'll let them help tell the story.
We say spring 2024. Do we know the specific day or weekend, or is that still to be determined?
It is still to be announced, not to be determined, but still to be announced. And we will make sure that if you sign up for our email blasts, you will be among the first to know here at the Hall.
Again, the new exhibit, The Souls of the Game, Voices of Black Baseball, coming to Cooperstown in the spring of 2024. We still have a few minutes left with Hall of Fame President Josh Rawitch. We do want to get to your questions as well. You can post those questions or comments in the chat room. We have one that's been waiting a while. Heather wants to know, as a Cleveland Guardians fan, it's hard to imagine the team without Terry Francona. Josh, could you talk about Terry's impact on the game?
Yeah, I mean, incredible manager, great player before he was a manager, and I think there's several people here who have worked with him personally and say that, similar to Bochy, just an unbelievable person. And I think that, again, is an important part when you talk about the Hall of Famers that we have here, and he's certainly one who's more than likely going to be on the ballot here in a couple of years, and what he's done puts him in that conversation. I think most people would say he's a Hall of Fame caliber human and has had an incredible managerial career. As a Guardians fan, you'll be happy to know, if you didn't see on our social media channels, we had a visit from the team earlier this week. A number of people drove out. The Guardians are going through a renovation of their own out at their ballpark, and so some of the artifacts they have, that's really cool stuff, including the famous drum that for so many years was played at the ballpark. They actually brought that here, and there's several things. So Bob Feller bat. There's a number of different artifacts they brought with them that we're going to keep for several years while they renovate their own museum or area of the ballpark where they usually have this stuff. So kudos to the Guardians squad. There was a trio of them that hit the road at 4 a.m, I think, on Monday. Showed up here by about 10 or 11. Spent the day gathering content, and you know how big of a fan base the Guardians have, because when that was posted, the picture of the drum out in front of the Hall of Fame, I mean, it blew up on social media. So kudos to you and your team, and Terry Francona may very well someday have an opportunity to be out here in Cooperstown.
Have you ever had a chance to meet Terry?
I met him this year for the first time. I spent just a few minutes with him actually at the winter meetings last year, I guess it was. And you can just tell. What's funny is, so the person I keep referencing in our communications department, John Shestakovsky, came from the Red Sox and knows Tito very well. And so sure enough, Tito loves kind of giving grief to Shesta and talking about him. And that is why a lot of the people that I worked with in Arizona are good friends with him and have talked about him for years. And just seems like an incredible leader. And that's, I think, in a lot of ways, when you look at someone who's accomplished what he or Dusty Baker or Bruce Bochy, these people who have led clubs for 20, 25 years, you don't do that just because you happen to have been a good player. You have to be a good leader of people. And I think Tito falls into that category pretty clearly.
Here's a pretty straightforward question from Robert Ewing, but one we've never had before. Robert wants to know, what size is the Baseball Hall of Fame staff?
So it's a great question, Robert. We are about 90 full-time staff members here throughout that's year-round full-time. In the summertime, we add about, we're up over 200 when you talk about part-time staff. And then we have a large number of part-time staff who are here. So it varies between, say, about 120 and 200 people over the course of the year. Obviously, more in the summertime when we're busy than in the winter. But I think most people, when I say that, are quite surprised to hear how large we are as a staff. There's so much that goes on here that is beyond the Hall of Fame itself, and that tends to get a lot of the attention, the plaque gallery and the process and all that sort of stuff, and rightfully so. But we're a museum, we're a library, we're an educational institution, and obviously with all of those things comes human resources and finance and marketing and retail and all the incredible areas of this building that require people to be what this place has become over the last 85 years.
Here's a question from Tim Zesny, and I apologize, Tim, if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. Tim wants to know, well, he says, people have asked me, how come Tito, that's Terry Francona, and Dusty Baker were not on the Hall of Fame ballot this year? Why is that the case?
Very fair question. So the way we have our rules is that you do have to be retired for 6 months before you can be on a ballot. And so had either guy retired at the end of last season, or even frankly made it to, I think, about the All-Star break, and if they just decided they weren't going to go, then they would have been eligible. But so much of our process has to happen in advance. So it would be very hard for us once somebody decides to retire like Dusty in mid to late October. Our process of putting together who's going to be on the ballot and what the committee of voters is going to look like, it would be very hard to change it at that point. And so ultimately they will certainly be among those that are looked at in 2026 for the class of 27. And that is generally the reason. They just didn't retire soon enough.
Here's a question relating to Black baseball and not so much Hall of Fame policy, but something that Major League Baseball came down with a couple of years ago. The question is also from Tim. With the Negro League statistics now part of the official Major League Baseball statistics, and with a bit of time having gone by, have numbers changed? For example, Willie Mays' home run totals. I can answer at least part of that question, Tim, in that Willie Mays played in the Negro Leagues in the early 50s. And Major League Baseball is only considering the Negro Leagues, I believe, through the 1948 season. So none of Willie Mays' Negro League statistics are considered part of that official Major League umbrella. So his total of 660 home runs has not changed. But anybody that played in the American or National League and also played in the Negro Leagues prior to and up to 1948, their overall statistics would include the Negro Leagues numbers. So yeah, for some players, those Major League numbers change. For others like Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, who played in the Negro Leagues in the 50s, no, their overall totals do not change. Anything you wanted to add to that, Josh?
No, I would just say, actually, I saw earlier that one of the people on the call here, Adam Dorowski from Baseball Reference, has been heavily involved in helping find those people like Gary Ashwell and the database that has been looking for Negro League statistics for a long time. You have to give these people incredible credit for the amount of time and energy they put into understanding and finding and digging into these numbers so that we could all understand which games were of the caliber that were major league level games in the Negro League. Some might have just been more amateur. And there's actually currently a committee at Major League Baseball that's working through all that. And our senior curator, Tom Schiebers, is part of that crew that's looking at trying to understand how do we tell that story more completely. And here in the museum, Baseball Reference, if you've been to the third floor, we use Baseball Reference statistics on the tower where we have all of our records. And so a lot of that stuff was able to be immediately incorporated into our statistical databases on site here. But some things, it will take us years to get through all of the areas of the museum where new labels have to be printed and information, and it's constantly changing and evolving, and we're okay with that, because so is our museum, and that's one of the great things about this place. It's not a static museum. There's history happening every single day, and again, a huge kudos to the people who have been involved in making all of that come to life, because that is a labor of love. They're not doing it for getting paid. They're doing it because they wanted to see what they could do to help change baseball history and document baseball history, and they've done an incredible job of that.
Funny, you just mentioned the name Adam Dorowski, and he just posted a comment correcting something I said. Let me read it. Adam writes, Mays did play with Birmingham in the Negro Leagues 1948 and 49, but he had no home runs in the box scores available so far for the 1948 season. So he did play in the Negro Leagues in 48, which does fall under that umbrella of Major League statistics. Thus far, the box score exploration research has not shown any home runs. That could change, but for now, he is at 660. So thank you, Adam, for clarifying that. Josh, as we get set to wrap up the program, a final question. Wanted to kind of look back at this year of 2023. A lot of things have happened in baseball. A lot of things have happened here at the Hall of Fame. We've, had tragedy. We lost our friend and our curator, John Odell, which is still a difficult thing we're dealing with. We also can look back at positive accomplishments. And as you look back at 2023, what are the one or two or three things that you're most proud of in terms of what the Hall of Fame has been able to do these last 11 to 12 months?
Well, on a personal note, I'd say just getting to know the staff here has been incredibly important to me. I think it's anybody in a role like this, it is important that you actually get to know the people that you work with. And so I think it's a never ending process. But I would say that as I look back at 23, I learned a lot about the people here. And I would put that at the head of any list. I would say that if you've been here in 23, you've seen we added a new area that's a kind of personalize your own plaque interactive that I think has been very, very popular. And we opened up the Savannah Bananas exhibit and hosted them here at Doubleday Field and created a digital content department that didn't exist and a TikTok account, and really just kind of adding some things that continue to help us be relevant for the next generation of fans. But at the same time, I think I'd like to think we've done a good job of not losing all the things that make this place special to anybody who's been coming for 50 years or who's been a fan for 80 years. And so I think that's pretty important to me. And I'll just end on this note because you mentioned losing John Odell. And when I think about, the culture that I want this building to embrace, it's something that I learned under the O'Malley family when I was at the Dodgers. And they just lost somebody in the last 24 hours. The president of the San Diego Padres, Peter Seidler, was a part of that family, who's not only obviously the owner and president of the Padres, but Peter O'Malley's nephew, Terry Seidler, who's been a very long time donor of the Hall of Fame, her son and good friend of mine, Tom Seidler's brother. So, I mean, you think about the impact that he's had, that his family, the O'Malley Seidler family, has had on the game of baseball. And I just, my thoughts are with them. All of our thoughts are with them. But I think the impact that they've been able to have on the game of baseball is something all of us aspire to do. And hopefully some of those things we did this year here at the Hall will continue to, be on all of our records for a lot of years to come. So thank you so much for letting me get some time to talk with everybody today.
Speaking of John Odell, his impact is going to continue to be felt here at the Hall of Fame for many years, but more specifically in 2024, and more on that at a later date. Always have good thoughts when we think about John. Josh, we appreciate your time over this past hour talking about some of the things that have happened here in Cooperstown, previewing things that are still to come, including our new Black Baseball exhibit, the Era Committee vote coming up next month. Lots of great stuff here in Cooperstown. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate you.
Hall of Fame President Josh Rawitch, our guest. We thank Josh. We thank all of you for joining us as well. And also thank you to the many questions. We were only able to get to some of them. We had a lot of great feedback. We do appreciate the interest that all of you have shown in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Thanks for being with us for Virtual Voices of the Game. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.